Greetings fellow Mist Wanderers, my name is Steve Morgan and this is DM of the Mists, covering all things CoS of Strahd and Ravenloft. I'm fighting off the tail end of a cold. I've been told, I was chatting to someone on the phone earlier, that my voice sounds different. I don't think it sounds different, but just a heads up in case I sound different or a little bit sniffly. I want to do this video because it comes up every now and again in places like the CoS of Strahd subreddit or the Facebook group, where somebody will say, hey, I'm a new DM, and what are some tips for CoS of Strahd? Or they might ask a different question and mention that they're a new DM when explaining what's going on when they ask their question. And you often see DMs say, CoS of Strahd probably shouldn't be a first campaign for a brand new DM. And I have opinions on this, so I wanted to do a video. I mean, what do I think? Do I think CoS of Strahd could make a good first adventure? I don't want to say no. Okay, I don't like saying to somebody that they shouldn't absolutely definitely not do it. I think if you really, really want to do it, you've got the time and the dedication to make it work, and you're passionate about it and dedicated to it, go for it. However, I think it's a challenge. It's a big campaign. It's not straightforward. There's a lot of moving parts, and people give the advice, read the book cover to cover, because there's some stuff that's kind of buried away in certain bits that you wouldn't expect. It's a bit odd. So with that in mind, I usually say to people, well, you can do CoS of Strahd first of all if you really, really want to, but I would recommend and suggest you try something else first, like a starter adventure or a few one-shots instead of running CoS of Strahd. And this was my experience. I was a player in CoS of Strahd. It was my first time playing D&D 5th edition. And then naturally when I started DMing, I thought, well, I want to run CoS of Strahd because I'm quite familiar with it. However, I was intimidated by CoS of Strahd, even though I knew it through playing it. And I was new to DMing, and I knew the rules as a player, but didn't know the rules as a DM. So what I did in the end is I got the starter set. At the time, it was the one with Lost Mine of Phandalva in it. And you know what? I'm glad I did, because I felt like I got all of my mistakes out of the way in Lost Mine of Phandalva. Lost Mine of Phandalva didn't go smoothly. I was very slow learning stuff. I made mistakes, but because it's more handholdy, and it's more linear and less sandboxy, more straightforward, I felt like it was, when the mistakes happened, they didn't matter or they were no big deal, and I was able to sort of work through it. If I jumped straight into CoS of Strahd instead of doing Lost Mine of Phandalva and made the mistakes that I made in Lost Mine of Phandalva in CoS of Strahd instead, maybe CoS of Strahd wouldn't have gone so well. And by doing Lost Mine of Phandalva first and getting all my silly mistakes out of the way, it made me more confident to run CoS of Strahd as a result, and more confident to add stuff into homebrew, because I ran Lost Mine of Phandalva pretty close to the book. I only changed like a couple of minor things, but CoS of Strahd, while I did mostly stick to the book, I felt more confident adding and changing some stuff, which if you spend time in like CoS of Strahd communities, you find is quite common. Obviously there's a lot of folks who like to play it straight out of the book, but there's a lot of guides and mods that people like to involve as well. So that's my experience. I would recommend, based on how it went for me, doing something else before going to CoS of Strahd. And I'd like to add as well, there was a great video fairly recently by Matt Colville of MCDM fame. If you're not familiar with Matt Colville, he's amazing. He gives advice to new DMs, well, not even new DMs, I guess experienced DMs can learn some stuff. He gives like D&D DMing advice, essentially. And he did a video fairly recently called How Long Should an Adventure Be? And what's quite funny is he used CoS of Strahd as the example of the long adventure, and talked about a small like one-shot module as a short adventure. And the argument he makes, and I'll leave a link in the description if you want to watch this afterwards, the argument that he makes is it's easier for new DMs especially to run something shorter. And there's a few quotes, a few snippets I'd like to grab. Around the 6.5 minute mark, he says, how many new DMs end up frustrated reading this, and he holds up CoS of Strahd, and get lost trying to run it? And then about 30 seconds later, around the 7:15 mark, he said DMs should not start with these massive adventures. And you know what, I kind of agree. Like I said, you can watch the video yourself, but he makes the point that things like these are sort of seen as the standard because they're the ones that are on sale, that people think, oh, this is what I have to run. I have to run a big adventure like this. No, you don't have to. At least not initially. And it's quite funny, even though I said, oh, I did Lost Mine of Phandalva, it worked for me, shortly after those two quotes, he says even Lost Mine of Phandalva is long, and he recommends something even shorter, and he recommends something he created called the Delian Tomb, which is just like a literal one dungeon one shot, which I've run actually, and it's great. And it's not just about you as the DM as well. It could be, you got to think about your players as well. If you're a new DM with new players as well, player burnout is the thing. Maybe they would be more comfortable starting off with something small and short to see what it's like, and then commit to something big like Curse of Strahd later on. You know, player burnout is probably less likely than DM burnout, but you can get player burnout as well. And also, as an aside, and I talk about this in my Should You Surprise Your Players with Curse of Strahd video, where I essentially say, no, you probably shouldn't, is that Curse of Strahd is not traditional in the sense of what people might expect D&D to be. When I was invited to play D&D, you know, I thought it'd be like Lord of the Rings, where you've got your elves and your dwarves and your goblins, and, you know, you might fight a dragon. And, you know, while, you know, you can have elves and dwarves in Curse of Strahd through player characters, there's no goblins and there's a dead dragon, spoiler alert. But the point I'm trying to make is that I went into it with these expectations of fighting similar to, you know, types of monsters you see in Lord of the Rings, and then end up fighting vampires and werewolves, which are hugely different, which is fine. I like vampire and werewolf stuff, but it was still a bit weird and still a bit jarring. So there's that as well. By running something like Lost Mine of Phandelver first, you're running traditional D&D and then leading into Curse of Strahd. And I'd argue that's better because they've fought one type of groups of monsters, and then they're going into something and fighting new. And for players I had a player who loved fighting different types of monsters, he found that really exciting because he was like, ooh, now I get to fight vampires and werewolves. We've done all the goblins. Now it's time for something else. So what are your options? Oh, I'm a big fan of Lost Mine of Phandelver. I don't think it's an amazing adventure, and I think Curse of Strahd is better, but I think it's good, and it's good for beginner players and beginner DMs. I appreciate nowadays, I think Lost Mine of Phandelver isn't sold anymore. It kind of got combined into, or expanded out is probably the best phrase to use, in Phandelver and Below the Shattered Obelisk, I think it's called, which I also own. I think I've got it downstairs somewhere. And so I suppose you could potentially buy that and then just run the first half of it. There are other starter sets, past and present. There was Dragon of Ice by a Peak. I know some people, that was kind of like an alternative. I think it was called the Essentials Kit, not the starter set, but you get my meaning. I think some people run that as a first adventure, but it is a bit different. It's more sort of, here's a quest board in a town, go nuts. There was Dragons of Stormwreck Isle, which I haven't got and haven't played or run, but I understand that was kind of the successor to Lost Mine of Phandelver. That was kind of a newer starter set that came out. And as I record this, but by the time I release it, I think it's out, there's Heroes of the Borderlands as well, which is the new starter set. And I saw a video, I'll include a link in the description, of somebody who did like a sort of unboxing, and I couldn't believe all the stuff it came with. It is pricier than the old starter sets, but with everything it comes with, I'm not surprised why, and I think it's probably still worth the money. Or you could do one-shots, like the Delian Tomb, like I mentioned earlier, the Matt Colville created and recommended one-shot. I actually did a video that offered 7 alternatives to Death House as a starter adventure for Curse of Strahd, and the Delian Tomb sort of is one. It's kind of like an adaptation of it. Even if you plan to run Curse of Strahd eventually with Death House as the intro, you might find that one of those one-shots works for you, so it might be worth having a look anyway. And that's it for this one. It's not an especially long video, it's simply ask a question and here's the answer. If you're new to the channel, hello, this is DM of the Mists. Half of my videos are Curse of Strahd, the other half of the wider Ravenloft setting, to do with Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, which covers Barovia and Strahd, but a whole bunch of other similar lands to Barovia and Dark Lords similar to Strahd. And I have a Curse of Strahd tips video. I have a playlist of about 40 to 50 Curse of Strahd videos for DMs. Please feel free to take a look, please subscribe, and my videos be waiting for you when you decide, you know, hopefully I've done my job and you think, right, okay, I'll put Curse of Strahd aside. That's the point I meant to make as well. Lost Mine of Phandelver, if you do something like that, is quite short. It delayed the start of Curse of Strahd, but only by a few months. And then Curse of Strahd was still waiting when I was ready to run it, just like my videos will still be here waiting for you when you're ready to run Curse of Strahd. And that's it for this one. Thank you, Mr. Wanderers.